What up, Wizards? It's Dev, and today it's time again for your favorite video. 5 decks, $5 a piece, all tuned to play well against one another, but also tuned to be as competitive as possible. Over the years, I've had a lot of you tell me that you've won F&Ms with these $5 decks somehow, and today we got maybe the most powerful batch ever. And I'm going to level with y'all just a little bit here. Kind of feels like a special time to do a 5 for 5 to me, because it's the last time we're going to be able to do one of these for maybe a good while here, where it only includes Magic the Gathering cards. No Final Fantasy, much as I'm going to love that set. No Spider-Man, no Avatar The Last Airbender, no Bluey. Could be. Who knows what they're going to do next. But yeah, this is the last one we're going to do for maybe a good long time, where it's just Magic the Gathering stuff. And that made it feel a little more special to me, and it made me want to put one of these out a little bit more. It's been too long since we've done one anyway. Let's do it, y'all. 5 decks, $5 a piece.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Real quick, just go ahead and do all the YouTube stuff if you don't mind. You can hit the button shaped like a thumb. Can't miss it down there. Subscribe to the sandwich if you haven't done that yet. We're trying to get to 150K. We're not too far away. And you can check out the Patreon link, or at least web address, in the description down there. Paste that into your address bar. You're good to go, baby. Look, I don't do a whole lot of sponsorships. I don't do a whole lot of channel membership stuff. I don't do affiliate links. Really, one of the only things making sure that this ship stays on course is the Patreon. So if you like what you see around here and you want to contribute or just keep the lights on in the first place, all I really need from you is $1 a month, and I would really appreciate if you consider it. But now let's get on into them decks, baby. Got 5 to look at today, all from Tarkir Dragonstorm. And the first deck we're going to check out sure does make me want to sing.
Teamer Harmonize.
This here is a deck. How did I do that, by the way? I'm not even sure myself, but this here is a deck that actually utilizes what is fast becoming my favorite mechanic from Tarkir Dragonstorm, and that is Harmonize. It's called Harmonize. You probably gleaned that. It turns out there are a lot of really cheap Harmonize pieces right now that are actually like good Magic cards, and we've also got a fair number of big creatures in this deck to help us harmonize our spells once they're in our yard. So let's look at the Harmonize stuff first, starting with the 4 copies of Channeled Dragonfire, as well as 4 copies of Glacial Dragon Hunt, and we've even worked in 4 copies of Roamer's Rebuke here, which is a cool little like ramp spell that lets you ramp twice. You know, what's better than ramping once is ramping twice. Same thing with these other 2 cards here. What's better than removing a creature once is doing it twice. And like, don't forget that you don't have to have a creature out in order to harmonize a spell. You can just pay full price. And I know that on all these cards, that's kind of steep, but if you draw dead late in the game, it's like having an extra card in your hand if you have a harmonized card in your yard. Glacial Dragon Hunt is especially bananas here because it allows us to discard other harmonized cards for later use. You really don't mind pitching those because, again, they're just kind of like an extra card in your hand once they're in your yard, but this also helps us see more cards, so it's just a really important option for the deck. But as far as Channeled Dragonfire goes, it doesn't look like too hot, right? But again, you'd be surprised how good removal spell twice can be. As a matter of fact, the achievement that you want to unlock most when you play this deck is win the game with full price Channeled Dragonfire out of your graveyard. I've done it in testing, but there's a couple more harmonized things in here, like the 2 copies of Winter Night Stories, one of the few rares we can play, and 4 copies of Mammoth Bellow. I was kind of surprised how cheap Winter Night Stories is, despite the fact that it actually sees some play in Jeskai Oculus, which is one of the most played decks in Standard as I write this video. So again, I was really glad this wasn't like $2 right now. It's still a reasonable price, and it's the best card with Harmonize in the entire deck. Talk about seeing more cards and pitching other Harmonized cards. This allows us to do that and just refills our hand in one go. Just fantastic card, and there's plenty of ways in the deck to cast it for really cheap. But Mammoth Bellow is surprisingly great. This can be the finisher for this deck a good bit of the time, and it makes a 5/5 when you first cast it. You can tap that 5/5 to help you cast the second copy of it out of your yard, but it's also really good against sweepers. It kind of feels like a Call the Herd from way back in the day, and maybe like it's actually good again now, you know what I mean? Like, getting 2 5/5s on one card is actually always going to be a good deal. But let's look at the big boys we got in here to help us cast our harmonized spells and just to help us win the game. You know, it's nice to attack with big dudes. It's pretty solid strategy. So we're going to play 4 copies of Teamer Tawny Back, 4 Obstinate Baloth, and 1 copy of Bonnie Paul Clear Cutter. Now, there's a fairly obvious upgrade for Tawny Back. We'll talk about some of those upgrades later, but as far as this card itself, right now, it's not that bad, man. It's really not. not? 3 mana for a 4/3 is a fairly aggressive rate. It's a big dude that can help us cast our Harmonize spells pretty nicely. And along with Glacial Dragon Hunt and Winter Night Stories, like this is yet another card that lets us filter cards in this deck. Like we're seeing every card in this deck every time we play a game, man. And again, I'll bring this up. I don't want to sound like a broken record or anything, but when you pitch a Harmonize card, it basically doesn't even leave your hand. So like all of these filtering effects just basically say draw cards on them. As far as Obstinate Baloth, this might look a little bit wonky, but it's actually like really, really well positioned in Standard right now. Not only is it a 4 mana 4/4 that gains you the life, that's actually pretty decent against aggro. Stonewalls most of their creatures, attacks through them as well, and gains you that 4 life back. Again, fantastic against any mice decks, but especially against pixie decks that are looking like turn 1 Hopeless Nightmare, you basically just get a 0 mana 4/4 on turn 1 in those matchups, and that'll help you just straight up win against one of the best decks in Standard with your crappy little $5 pile, and that feels really good. But, you know, Baloth is also a decently sized creature that'll help you cast them Harmonize spells sometimes, and often, especially if you're able to drop it early thanks to a Hopeless Nightmare, Bandit's Talon, or something like that, it can get you casting them Harmonize spells very quickly. But apart from that, Bonnie Paul's in here, why not? I think she's like one of the best cheap, large creatures in Standard right now for a deck just like this, and nicely, she gives you 2 relatively big bodies to help you harmonize stuff off of. But to finish off the deck here, we got 4 copies of Lawn War Elves, 2 Fires of Victory, and 2 Ether Eyes, which turned out to be a killer of a card. But let's start with Lawn War Elves, just one of the best 1-drop creatures in the history of Magic, and you can get it from some editions for as little as 10 or 12 cents right now. So let's play the full playset of that. It's going to help us ramp into a lot of the kind of expensive cards in our deck, and if we don't have any other creatures out, these will also help us ramp into Harmonize stuff that's in our yard. So I think it's imperative to play some of this and get on board as early as we can. But Fires of Victory is just a serviceable removal spell with all the card draw and stuff in this deck, or at least the filtering. You know, we can keep some number of cards in our hand a good bit of the time, and Fires of Victory is a decent removal spell that also helps draw us cards sometimes. But as far as Ether Eyes goes, man, it's not quite a sweeper, but it is phenomenal, especially in this particular grouping of decks, because it's good against basically all 4 of the other decks for various reasons, whether they play creatures that are really expensive, or they play a bunch of tokens, or they want to put a bunch of counters on their creatures, or maybe they just want to do one big thing on one big turn, and Ether Eyes will completely nerf that. Ether Eyes is good against, again, basically every deck in this pile, but again, it's really good in just basic Standard right now. You'd be surprised how much Ether Eyes can save you. It's not quite Settle the Wreckage, but for like 20 cents, I think that it's the next best thing. Before we get to the upgrades, I should tell you there's 25 lands in this deck, but you may notice they're not popping up on the screen to my right, your left. Why is that, Dev? Well, they're really simple mana bases, mostly comprised of basic lands, and also some common tap duals, occasionally the 3-color tri-land from each clan, right, like Frontier Bivouac for Teamer, but again, very simple mana bases that really could use some upgrading. So with that in mind, I'm not going to go in depth on any of these mana bases, but if you want to check them out, I'll leave links in the description to each one of these decks on Moxfield. You can see them there. As far as upgrades go, I've got a couple that I want to point out for basically every deck today, and the first one for this one is Teamer Battle Crier. A fantastic card, man. We already have a few cards in this deck that are power 4 or greater, obviously, so that'll reduce the cost of a bunch of our spells, including Harmonized spells that we cast out of our yard. So if you just want to slot this in for Teamer Tawny back, in paper, it's really, really cheap to buy, but of course on Arena, it's 4 more wild cards, which is a whole bunch of wild cards when you think about it. So probably just stick with Tawny back in that situation. But as far as a big upgrade, if you want to spend like $4 a piece, I think this deck could probably fit a couple of copies of Urini. We've got Lawn War Elves, we've got Roamer's Rebuke for like ramp in here. We've got 12 different removal spells in the main deck, so it's actually not too hard to get to Urini. And when you play Arena, you usually win, at least in my experience. So if you've got a couple of bucks, you might want to throw in a couple of copies. But now from Harmonize to Mobilize, much smaller guys, we must surmise. This is just a red-white Mobilize deck. We've actually already done a deck tag this season for Mardu Mobilize. And within that deck tag, I talked about a kind of budget version of Boros Mobilize you could build. This is even cheaper than that version, but still very similar to it. It all starts with 4 copies of Stadium Headliner. There is a reason his name comes first on the marquee, but there's also 4 copies of Shock Brigade in here. Now, it is obvious that Stadium Headliner is a card we want to play, and right now it's only about 35 cents. It takes up a great deal of the budget for this deck by itself, but it is extremely important to get on the board on turn 1 in this deck, and It's even more important to get on board with a Mobilize guy on turn 1, and this is basically the only option in Standard for that. So we have got to play this card, and it even doubles as a removal spell in the late game, usually during an attack step, weirdly enough, but that's when you have the most creatures. So definitely play Headliner, but Shock Brigade kind of shocked me, honestly, with how good it could be from time to time, especially if you're on the play. You play this on turn 2, its Menace is going to really help it get through a lot of the time on turn 3. And not to mention, it's got like a halfway decent toughness for a 2-drop, and that'll help it survive some combat steps too. But we've also got 4 copies of Dalkovan Pack Beast and 4 Zergo's Vanguard, which really reminds me of like a Keldon Warlord or something, just a card that I really, really liked back in the day. I've always liked creatures like this in go wide decks. It's one of my favorite kinds of creatures to play, and Zergo's Vanguard is no different. As a matter of fact, it's actually in some ways one of the cooler creatures they've ever printed like this, like he works really nicely with his own Mobilize, even if there's nothing else on the table. So big fan of this guy. But Dalkovan Pack Beast, man, wow, this was actually kind of a shocker to me right here. There was 1 or 2 cards in every deck that kind of overperformed my expectations. Just letting you know, spoiler alert, it's going to be Pack Beast this time around, man. 3 tokens every single turn is really decent, man. We're also playing 4 copies of Shocking Sharpshooter and 4 Descendant of Storms here, along with a secret weapon, 2 copies of Arabella Abandoned Doll. Now, Bella, man, this is another like 35 cents card, which stretches the budget just a little bit, but you gotta have Arabella in your Mobilized deck, especially if you're just going red-white. I think you'd be really, really dumb not to throw this card in as at least a 2 of, man. It's a great finisher. You can, in fact, stack her ability with the Mobilize ability to get all those little Mobilize dudes into play, and then Arabella's ability goes off, and you just win the game, because usually you're like lava axing your opponent or better, and importantly, gaining a bunch of life back. So this will help you win a bunch of aggro mirrors and stuff. Just absolutely play Bebe. She's ridiculous. But Shocking Sharpshooter, again, I don't want to use this joke twice, so I won't. It did well and did not actually surprise me that much. I knew that an Impact Tremor on legs was going to be pretty decent in Mobilize, and like I said, I already built a budget version of this deck, and I played Sharpshooter in it the entire time. Now, this is no War Leader's Call, and it's not even really Impact Tremors because it's so much more removable than a card like either one of those. But that said, it at least triggers itself. You play Shocking Sharpshooter into a Shocking Sharpshooter, you get a damage. You can't really say that with the other 2 enchantments. So I'm not going to go out on a limb here and say it's better, but Impact Tremors is $250. War Leader's Call is how much right now? A lot. So the fact that you can grab an effect like that for like 15 cents is a steal. And Descendant of Storms, this is another way to get on board really early in the game with the Savannah Lions, and a pretty good Savannah Lions too. Again, this deck wants to go wide. There's a few different effects like Stadium Headliner that care about how many creatures we're playing in the first place. So Descendant of Storms can put more dudes out. That's always good. But to finish it off here, we got 4 copies of Frontline Rush, 3 copies of Burst Lightning, and 4 Painter's Studio. Again, we can't afford like War Leader's Call, and we can't even really afford Sanguine Evangelist, which might be the better card. But again, fairly impressed by Painter's Studio here, right? This is effectively an anthem for any of our attacking guys, which is great because, got a lot of little dudes in here. But there's also the card draw mode on it, and there's really not a whole lot in this deck that allows us to see more cards. And we are, more than ostensibly, we are objectively an aggro deck, so we run out of cards in our hand pretty quickly, and Painter's Studio, or really Deface Gallery, is just a great way of getting more cards and getting more board state. We really need something to recover after sweepers. We are terrible against them, but Deface Gallery gives us a way to get more cards and play to the board. As far as upgrades for this thing go, they're fairly easy, right? I've already talked about War Leader's Call, which is a lot. I think it's like $6 or $7 right now, which is less than it's been. I should at least point that out. I think that if you're going to buy a War Leader's Call, it's not a bad price right now, but Voice of Victory is a bad price right now. It's come down a good bit in the last week or so, but it's still like double digits to buy a Voice of Victory. That said, if you want this deck to be as good as possible, play set of Voice of Victory is more or less imperative. But let's keep it moving and get to our third deck, which is probably the coolest deck that we're going to look at today. It's Xan Dragons, man. That's right. We're not just going to do set mechanics. There's a few set mechanics in here, don't get me wrong. We've already looked at a couple, but I wanted to liven it up a little bit and see if I could make a $5 Dragons deck just for the challenge. And turns out we pulled it off pretty nicely here. I really was surprised by how good this deck turned out. Now, it starts with a couple of copies of Scavenger Region. If I was going to upgrade the deck, I would include more, but I'm just on 2 right now because the card's like 55 cents, and that takes up, 20% of our budget in one go, but it is absolutely worth it to play this card. We've got 14 dragons in this deck, and that means we're not really going to sweep our side of the board most of the time with Scavenger Region because it specifically says non-dragons get hit for -X. That can be very valuable, but just the creature half of this is also ridiculous. So yes, play that. But we've also got 4 Disruptive Stormbroods, as you can see. Whether it's the 2-mana version just being a halfway decent removal spell, or the 5-mana version being a halfway decent removal spell and a freaking flying body, like, this card is much better than anyone's given it credit for so far this standard season. I'm going to start playing it in expensive decks. This card's been impressive, but apart from that, we've also got 4 Segu Wildling and a kind of a weird one for Riling Dawnbreaker. Now, I would probably replace this with other dragons if I had money, but I don't have money. Just in case you don't, it's a fine card. It really is. It kind of feels like a Sarah Angel in some ways that will also boost the power of some of your other dragons from time to time, and gives you a 2-drop creature too, and there's kind of nothing wrong with that. I'll take it some of the time, but Segu Wildling has been all right, man. Like, the dragon half of this is just a little flyer. I mean, it's not a little flyer, but it's not a huge one either, but gaining 3 life is actually really decent. Again, against all these aggro decks in the format right now, you can get to it with some of the ramp in the deck, like, sure, give it a shot. But honestly, the best thing about this has been the Lay of the Land mode, the Omen half of the card, especially in a deck with a very cheap mana base that includes a whole lot of basic lands. This card is kind of tailor-made for a pile like that. But we're not quite done with dragon stuff yet. We got 2 copies of Purging Stormbrood, along with 2 Teeming Dragonstorm and 4 Dragonstorm Globe here. Now, Purging Stormbrood, I'm only playing a couple of copies of because even though this is one of my favorite Storm Broods in the entire set, I've said that a few times here on the channel, and I'm not changing that opinion. I really like this instant speed save a creature mode and give it lifelink and do all that cool stuff, but most of our guys cost a lot of mana, so this isn't going to be great in the early turns like it normally would be, and I feel like that relegates it to a 2 of, but again, the dragon half of this is pretty decent when you do get to play it. That said, Teeming Dragonstorm also looks weird, but look, we got 14 dragons in this deck, man. That's a ton of dragons. We'll be popping this back to our hand and filling our board with 2/2s. And that's great because we got a lot of flying guys. Right? We got all these dragons in our deck. That lets us take to the skies, swing our dudes in, and get in for combat damage pretty easily because we got all that evasion. But, we filled the ground with all these 2/2s and we could deal with the crackback on our opponent's side. And Dragonstorm Globe is actually a pretty decent source of ramp, especially in this deck where like most of our good dragons will cost 5 mana. Like Disruptive Stormbrood, Segu Wildling, I could go on. A lot of our cards cost 5 mana, so Dragonstorm Globe will help us go from turn 3 to turn 4 actually dropping most of our stuff. I like that. Also fixes our mana. That can be especially good in a deck with so many basic lands and stuff, and makes our dragons larger. Nothing wrong with that. We got a lot of like common and uncommon dragons in here that aren't quite up to snuff in terms of rate. Their power toughness could be slightly higher. This helps us get there. But we've also got some more dragon-centric stuff. 4 copies of Caustic Exhale and 2 copies of Osseous Exhale. This gives us 6 decent dragon-themed removal spells, and along with Disruptive Stormbrood, gives us a ton of actual removal spells. As a matter of fact, we're not even done with removal spells just yet. We'll talk about a couple more in just a second, but Caustic Exhale is a phenomenal 1-mana removal spell, and in a deck with 14 dragons, it will be 1 mana most of the time, the vast majority of the time. This is, a lightning bolt against creatures that even gets around indestructibility and stuff. We're also playing 4 copies of Shoot the Sheriff, a pretty great removal spell for only 20 cents right now. Let's run it. But we've also got 4 Llanowar Elves in this deck. Can we change the artwork? Can we get the old Anson Maddox? Yes, that's my childhood right there. But yeah, like I said earlier, this is just like one of the best 1-drop creatures in the history of Magic. I mean, yeah, there's like Birds of Paradise and stuff too, but this is up there like in maybe the top 10 even 1-drop creatures. So when you can get it for 10, 12 cents, you do it, right? You just play one of the most powerful cards in Standard. When you have the chance to do that, you build in budget. You got Forest, Play Lana World. As far as upgrades go, a very obvious one is one I've already mentioned. Up the beanstalk, like most of our common dragons and uncommon dragons are going to cost like 5 mana a piece. And we can kind of like make up for that by playing up the beanstalk. Not only is it a really good 2-drop, and we don't really have enough of those in this deck, but it's also going to draw us cards early and draw us a ton of cards as the game goes on. But if you wanted another good upgrade, I think Bloomvine Region is phenomenal, man. This card's only like $1 right now, which means, if we played 4 of it, that would be $4. we can't, spend 80% of the deck's budget on one playset. But if you've got a couple of extra bucks laying around, I really think you could take out like whatever it is, Riling Dawnbreaker or whatever, and probably just slot in Bloomvine Region, especially along with Segu Wildling. You'll be gaining all the life in the world. But let's move into my favorite of these 5 decks here. I don't like to play favorites. I want them to remain objective and professional and all that, whatever. This is Cynic Fleshcrafter, and this deck is wild. So I don't understand why this is only $5 to build right now, but somehow it is. Now, rather than being built around a mechanic, this one is built around Naga Fleshcrafter. Now, it does have the Renew mechanic, but we're not really playing like Simic Renew here or anything like that. We've got a lot of ways to get stuff out of our yard, but this is the only card in the deck with the actual Renew keyword. But it's a doozy of one, baby. You can make all of your creatures into a copy of a creature you currently have on the board, and that is a way to win games if you do it right. But how do you do it right? Well, we ended up using Earth Rumbler in this deck, and have no fear if you turn a Earth Rumbler into a creature by crewing it somehow, and there's a couple of different ways to do that, right? But if you turn an Earth Rumbler into a creature, and then Naga Fleshcrafter targeting the Earth Rumbler, don't worry, all of your guys are in fact 7/6 creatures that are animated. I was worried they would just like turn into vehicles or something, but no, they're animated, they can attack, and that means that you can win the game with a bunch of trampling scaled worms. We're just turning all of our guys into scaled worms, and if you're an Ice Age fan like me, that's a very special thing to you. But even if you don't get the reference, all your guys being 7/6 tramplers is a pretty obvious way to just win games if you have enough dudes out, and you don't even really need that many dudes out to pull it off. Now, there's other tricks in the deck in case you don't have your Earth Rumbler right then and there. You could also turn all your guys into Kishla Skimmers, or you could even turn all your dudes into Attuned Hunters, right? Both of these care when stuff leaves your graveyard, and there's a bunch of ways to make things leave your graveyard in this deck, even without a ton of Renew creatures. But again, these will trigger off of Naga Fleshcrafter using its ability in renewing and all that, so keep that in mind. Kishla Skimmer is just a great way to keep up the card draw as the turns go on. That's fantastic, and it's just a 2/2 flyer. You can turn all of your guys into Skimmers and get in for a bunch of damage. That's one option, but you can also turn all your guys into Skimmers and then make a card leave your graveyard and draw a full grip, which is a fun little trick. But Attuned Hunter is another one where you can turn all your guys into hunters and then remove a card or two from your yard by hook or by crook, and then you got a bunch of huge trampling guys, which is great. But Attuned Hunter is fine by itself. This will often be a 5/5 or a 6/6 trample over the course of a game, and that's a good creature. But as far as supporting cast here, we're also on 4 copies of Einok Wayfarer and 4 copies of Molt Tender. Both of these are pretty good at making cards leave your graveyard. Einok Wayfarer only makes a card leave your yard once, but it's pretty cheap to cast in the first place, and it helps you get your land drops. As far as Molt Tender goes, though, this is ramp that helps a card leave your yard every single turn, making sure that your Attuned Hunter grows, your Kishla Skimmer draws your cards all the time. Just Molt Tender is a ridiculous magic card specifically for this deck, and for what it's worth, a bunch of other decks should play it. But there's also 2 copies of Elvish Regrower and 2 copies of Dredger's Insight. So again, more cards that'll make stuff leave your graveyard. And Elvish Regrower is actually a pretty decently sized dude. If you want to turn all your guys into it, I guess you can get in an attack. But this is just great for effectively being like a eternal witness in some ways, Getting stuff back from your graveyard is just good in and of itself, even if it doesn't trigger a bunch of other stuff you got sitting on the table. It ain't half bad. But Dredger's Insight might not be a body or anything, but this is another way to get important cards from the top of your deck while also making stuff leave your yard. But to finish it off, we've got 2 copies of Auroral Procession, so we can have just regrowth in our standard deck. Seems good. But there's also some Rebluval, 4 copies of Unable to Scream, and 2 Ringing Strike Mastery. You could play Tempo like on summon effects if you'd rather, but I really don't want to have to deal with the guys like ever again. And this effectively blanks the creatures forever. As far as Ringing Strike Mastery goes, if they pay 5 mana to untap one of their dudes, I count that as a dub. That's like your whole turn to untap a guy. All right, cowboy. But as far as Unable to Scream goes, this ain't Swords to Plowshares or anything, and it's not even the next best thing, but it's a pretty good card for just a single mana. And note, yeah, they get a 0-2, they can block with it, but most of our big tricks in this deck with Fleshcrafter give our dudes trample. If we got a bunch of 7-6 tramplers, we really don't care about your 0-2 blocker. As far as upgrades for this one go, there's a pretty obvious one, and it's just Overlords, whether it's the blue one or the green one. And as good as the green one is, you Fleshcrafter and you turn all your guys into this dude, then you're swinging with a bunch of 6-power guys, you're ramping a million. But honestly, I think that Overlord of the Flood Pits is the better option, and it's cheaper in paper for what it's worth, and I think that's actually worth a lot considering Overlord of the Hauntwoods is so expensive. But Flood Pits is only a few bucks right now, and you can turn all of your guys into, 5-power flyers, and if that doesn't win you the game, you get to draw half your deck. You're going to have to pitch some cards too, but you get to draw so many cards if you're turning like 4 dudes into Overlord of the Flood Pits. So I think that is a pretty good option. We have come to the final deck of the video, and this is actually one of the ones I was most excited to build, despite the fact that it's not like it's a theme we've never seen before. It's just a theme that exists in Standard and absolutely no one is building around, so I could not wait to try my hand at Golgari Counters. And the fact that it's only $5 and we get to play dupes of some of the best counter cards of all time right now is actually pretty great. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at this thing. We're going to play 4 copies of Stalwart Successor and 4 copies of Host of the Hereafter to start things off. Now, Stalwart Successor is not a straight up dupe of like a Winding Constrictor or even a Hardened Scales, right? But it is really very close. It makes up for its slightly higher casting cost than some of those cards by having Menace and a higher power toughness too. And actually matters a good bit. If it gets 1 counter, then suddenly it's getting 2 counters and you're attacking with a 5-power Menace, which is great, actually. Host of the Hereafter is a amazing magic card, baby. It's a 4-mana 4/4, basically. And even if you don't put a counter on a single thing after it enters the battlefield, once it dies, something else gets a couple of counters. And again, that works very, very well with Stalwart Successor, which will give it more counters when it comes into play, and it'll give creatures more counters when the thing dies, too. So this is a pretty sturdy dude just based on rate alone. And even when it dies, not all of its power leaves the table, and that can be really important. But I've also got 4 copies of Yathan Tomb Guard and 2 copies of Hollow Merc Siege, 55 cents a piece, taking up a whole 20% plus of the budget by itself, but it's more than worth it. And so is Yathan Tomb Guard. This is only 10 cents right now, and that's ridiculous. If you are playing a deck in Commander that cares about +1/+1 counters and you can play swamps in it, you need to play this card. It's just absolutely phenomenal the kind of card draw piece this is for counters decks. And it's not like they haven't seen anything like it before, but it's redundant with some pieces that we've seen before that we know to be very good. So again, I think this is a phenomenal EDH card, and I was really worried about how good it would be in Standard, but it actually sets up fairly nicely in this deck thanks to a couple of like smaller creatures that we get to play. But Hollow Merc Siege, though, the best card in the deck. So good it makes me drop my glasses onto the floor, which I've just done. But yeah, Hollow Merc Siege just literally does it all, and I'd like to play more copies of this. But let's keep looking at creatures here, because we got 4 copies of Wildwood Scourge in here, along with 4 copies of Evolving Adaptive, a dude that I basically play in every single like mono green stompy deck that I've built for the last couple of years here. I've just always been a huge fan of Adaptive, but I guess no one else is because he's like a nickel or even less. I think Scryfall has this guy at like 3 cents to buy right now. It's absolutely wild. He is just one of the better green 1-drops in Standard. He gets to a 3/3, a 4/4 very fast, and it's very easy to make him do that in this deck. And, you know, you put extra counters on him with Successor. That's wonderful. But you also put extra counters on Wildwood Scourge with Successor, which can also be phenomenal. These cards are on screen together because they work together very, very well. But I'm also running 4 copies of Gnarlid Colony in here, along with a couple of copies of Snakeskin Veil, which is great for putting counters on creatures. Works really well with Stalwart Successor, obviously, but just really good for protecting guys, you know, like Stalwart Successor and Yathan Tomb Guard. Even some of our other creatures are really important to protect. So we'll play a couple copies of the Veil, but Gnarlid Colony is going to give basically every guy in the deck trample. And we need some 2-drops in the first place. So it's good for that in and of itself. But the fact that it basically says your creatures you control have trample is a ridiculous mode on this card. But to finish it off here, we're playing 2 copies of Synchronized Charge. That's an exciting new card. But we also get a couple of copies of Inspiring Call and 4 full Shoot the Sheriff here. Again, you're playing swamps, you want a cheap removal spell. Shoot the Sheriff is ideal, but these other 2 cards are more interesting for what we're doing, right? As far as Inspiring Call goes, this is a great call. I don't think you need 4 copies. You don't want this to rot in your hand while you wait on the perfect time to deploy it. But when you do have the perfect time to deploy it, it's like a full grip and you win combat or just the game. But finally, Synchronized Charge is a card I could not wait to build with. It's actually one of the whole reasons I wanted to build Golgari Counters, despite the fact that we have like Stalwart Successor and Yathan Tomb Guard and all these amazing like +1/+1 counter things I did want to play with. Again, Synchronized Charge is like the big reason I built the deck, and we're down to 2 copies from originally 4, but just like Inspiring Call, it's not a 2-of because it's a bad card. You just don't need a million copies of it, especially considering once you have 1 copy, you kind of have 2. As far as the upgrades for this deck, one that you could make is Gold Vein Hydra, but it's currently like $10 right now, and it's just okay. It's just an okay Magic card. One that I really wanted to put in the deck, and as a matter of fact, was in the deck at first until I realized this card did not cost 35 cents. It actually costs like $1.16 for a copy of Warden of the Grove. Sucks because I really wanted Warden of the Grove to be in this deck. Instead, we had to play Wildwood Scourge, but you know, it's only $1 if you already have a few copies of it. I would take out the Wildwood Scourge because it somehow, for whatever reason, doesn't work with Hydras. Probably because it can't proc off of itself. But it would go infinite. But either way, I would take out the Wildwood Scourge, throw in Warden of the Grove, because again, this is the card I wanted to play in the deck before I realized it was slightly too expensive. But it is a banger of a Magic card. But that's it for this one. If we're going to give out awards to these decks, I guess one I had most fun playing is Simic Fleshcrafter. The one with the most cards I thought would be bad, but actually turned out to be good, is probably Xan Dragons. Most competitive probably actually goes to Boros Mobilize here. Deck that feels like home when I play it is probably Teamer Harmonize. And if I had to give an award to Golgari Counters, it would be best deck that obviously exists in Standard, but people refuse to build anyway. And now that I've teleported my glasses back to my face, I guess that concludes the 5 for 5. Don't worry, it won't be the final 5 for 5 ever, but I guess it is going to be the last one for a while with just Magic the Gathering cards in it. Either way, hope you liked this one. Had a pretty unique batch of decks this time. Why are my glasses fogging up? Apart from that, just do the YouTube stuff on your way out. If you didn't do it earlier, hit the button shaped like a thumb, sub to the sandwich, and of course, you can check out the Patreon. Just couldn't do it without that Patreon. But anyway, y'all, that is Allski Kowalski. That is also Iski Lewitsky. So I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.